Greetings, everyone. Welcome to today's program, sponsored by the Plant Initiative, Back to the Future, Gift Logic and Sacred Responsibilities to Our Plant Kin, with Keith Williams and moderator Laura Pastarfi. I'm Paul Moss, Executive Director of the Plant Initiative, and I'm very excited to introduce Keith and Laura and to start off our one-hour program. I'm speaking to you from the traditional homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwe people in Minnesota. Dr. Keith Williams is an assistant professor of educational studies at Athabasca University. His work focuses on better understanding how to be good relations with our more than human kin. Keith draws heavily on Haudenosaunee teachings. Part of his paternal lineage is from a Mohawk community on the shores of Lake Ontario. He will also draw on post-human philosophy and his lived experience with family members, human and otherwise. Keith has an undergraduate degree in plant science, a master's in mycology, and a PhD in educational studies with a focus on Indigenous ways of knowing and being. Dr. Laura Pastarfi is adjunct faculty in philosophy and religion at the California Institute of Integral Studies. She is a scholar and writer focusing on trees in the Western philosophical tradition. Laura is currently working on a volume co-edited with Dr. David Macaulay, tentatively titled The Wisdom of Trees, Thinking Through Arboreality, expected to be published in 2024. She works as the director of the Psychedelic Assisted Therapies and Research Certificate Program at CIIS. Laura is also a Plant Initiative board member. The program will start with a half hour of conversation between Keith and Laura. For the remainder of the program, Keith will be responding to questions posed by you, the attendees, that will be presented by Laura as selected from questions that are posted on the Zoom chat. So we encourage you to suggest a question for Keith to discuss by posting it in the chat, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. This program is being recorded and it will be posted online on the Plant Initiative's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording will be sent to everyone who registered. With that, I'm turning over the program to Laura.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And especially thank you so much to you, Keith. I just want to say that I'm joining you from the North Bay near San Francisco, California, and that is occupied indigenous Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok territory, recognized as the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria. So we're here today, Keith, to speak about your work, and I want to encourage those of you who in the audience who haven't already read Keith's work to especially check out the articles Tending a Vibrant World, Gift Logic and Sacred Plant Medicines that Keith wrote with Suzanne Brandt, and Indigenous Philosophy and the Psychedelic Renaissance that Keith wrote with a few colleagues. Those are a couple of the articles that have really highly influenced me. Put a couple of the links in the chat as soon as we get started here. But I encourage you to read those, and then Keith has many other articles that you might want to check out. So I also just want to say that Keith and I are friends and we've taught together. So I'm really excited about this conversation with you today, Keith.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. Me too. I as soon as you invited me, you and Paul invited me, I was thrilled because more than anything, I love our conversations. So, and actually, if I could just add something, I'm coming in from I've got one foot, as I like to say, one foot on the eastern side of the western door in Mi'kma'ki, specifically Sebeganegedic, which is a region of Nova Scotia, this province where I live in Canada, where it's named after the Apios americana, which is a traditional food of many Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. It's the original ground apple, or pomme de terre. And my other foot is in the dish with one spoon territory in the Great Lakes region.
Thank you, Keith. Well, to get started, I just want to talk about your background in agriculture and food scholarship as well as mycology. Can you tell us a bit about when you first became interested in plants and fungi?
Sure, thank you, Laura. I grew up in a very rural area, and I still live in a very rural area. And I spent many hours as a boy exploring the seashore and the woods. And just to paint a picture, I mean, the forest type here is dominated by white spruce, black spruce, eastern white pine, larch, red maple, sugar maple, American beech, and then in the understory, alder, rowan, high bush cranberry, elder, witch hazel, beaked hazel. So the parent material here is largely granite, so it's poorly drained. So that means there's a lot of pools and ponds and wetlands. And between that and the abundant mushrooms, mosses, and lichens, the mist drifting in off the Atlantic. I mean, it was really a magical landscape to grow up in. And we grew up in my family picking berries and harvesting mushrooms and all of that, and clam digging and whatnot. And I guess for me, that stayed with me, and I've taken that, those kind of gathering practices with me everywhere I've gone.
Mhm. Thank you. I feel like you've really painted a picture of
Thanks.
the place there. I'm curious, when did you start seeing plants and fungi as kin? You write about plants and fungi as kin so much, and can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, thank you. I definitely can. And I think I guess I remember it. I remember when I was a boy, I would often spend a lot of time in the woods behind the house, and we would also spend time at a local wilderness area. And I remember encountering lichens. Actually, it was lichens that did it for me. They drew me in, and so I really appreciated their myriad forms, their colors, and their habits. And I found them, strange, persistent, beautiful, and my attention to them was, it really developed into this kind of unconditional positive regard or unconditional love, just through that proximity. And I, when I try to put myself back in that place, it's not easy. But I put my head back in that place, and my whole self, I suppose. Um, I remember sort of running around, the trails, and just enjoying the rocks and the brook and whatnot, and the lichens, and just feeling like, I was there doing my thing, and they were there doing their thing. So there was this shared proximity, shared emplacement, I think. And I think for me, it was really as simple as that, and that affection and that love and that positive regard evolved from just being close to them, and regarding them, recognizing them.
I'm curious also how that's changed over time. How is it for you now?
It's a really good question, and I feel like I've probably neglected my duties to the lichens. I really haven't spent a whole lot of time probably in the past, I don't know, 5 or 6 years attending to them. Instead, I spend a lot of time thinking about mushrooms, and also in my garden too. So I love gardening. It's a bit of an obsession. So yeah, it's yeah. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think well, actually, I can say one thing. One of the things that I've kind of realized also is that it's not just proximity, I think, that helps people to develop that sense of kinship. It's really a mutual interdependence. And so I think, for example, corn is probably a good example of that, where we've traditionally needed corn, required corn for our lives. And I think arguably humans in North America still do, because as Michael Pollan has pointed out, corn is everywhere, and we're essentially, corn walking. But of course, as you know, corn also needs us to reproduce and to survive, to continue. So
Uh, Thanks for bringing corn in. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about corn later.
sure.
Yeah. So indigenous gift logic has been a key aspect of your recent work, and that was the one of the articles that I had mentioned earlier. What is gift logic, and how do gifts relate to plants?
Yeah, well, I think I guess the gift is fundamentally different from an exchange, relationship based on exchange. And so whether that relationship based on exchange is one in which we exchange cash for goods and services, or barter. The gift logic or gift economy is a little bit different. It basically revolves around the idea of giving, so that giving to the whole without expectation of return, immediate or direct return. And I think, a friend of mine who's a Cherokee woman, Buffy Turner. she shared with me that that she had heard from an Anishinaabe friend that that if you had to boil down the essence of Anishinaabe culture, it would be more life, and that's really stuck with me. Like I just there's something I find about that that formulation, and so I think really that's also for me factored into how I perceive the gift. And so if if we're giving without the expectation of receiving directly in return, essentially the purpose of that, or what underlies that is this collective flourishing more than human flourishing. So not just flourishing for people, but flourishing for the plants and for the animals and the rivers and the waterways and the mountains and rocks. So I don't know if that, I'm just trying to think if there's something else I should say about gift logic. I mean, it's essentially like like this model of collective care. And I really believe that not just in the psychedelic renaissance, so to speak, or the so-called psychedelic renaissance, but I think collectively, I think if we I don't know. I mean, I think if we could embody or embrace gift logic in our dealings with the world around us, I just feel like that's for me that's one way out of that hyper individualistic, exploitative, and extractive capitalism that we find ourselves immersed in and frankly drowning in those waters. Um, there was something else I wanted to say about the gift. Right. There's a traditional teaching that I had heard a few years ago, and basically it's around growing corn. And I don't mean to talk about corn so much, but it may come up a few times. But the idea is that when we grow corn, we grow some for ourselves, but we also grow some for the animals, like the raccoons and the birds, and then we grow some for our families, and we grow some for our neighbors. So I try to take that approach with everything I do, and so I think that kind of generosity is really I don't know. It's something I strive for, and I really want other people, and I just hope that when I do that in my little village, that other people notice, and hopefully other people will take that up. So,
Uh, That's really helpful for understanding the gift of corn and the gifts that you're giving as well.
oh, thank you.
And I appreciate that you brought up the psychedelic plants. I'm curious if there are any special considerations for sacred or psychedelic plants.
Yeah, I think of all the plants, I feel like psychedelics are probably most, or sacred plant medicines are most it's probably easiest with those plants to appreciate their personhood because it comes through loud and clear. It's kind of irrefutable, if you have enough experience with them. And so I think one of the things that I'd like to share about psychedelics, and I think I wrote a little bit about that in the Gift Logic paper. Um, for me, I don't deny that someone in Nova Scotia can't have healing or beneficial experiences with, say, for instance, ayahuasca. I think that's entirely possible. But as I'd written, I believe that, and this is following indigenous logic, I believe that the full healing potential of these medicines can only be realized when we take medicines that have been shaped and formed by the same forces that have shaped us. And so that's that emplaced, I think that there's real power in that emplaced relationship. And when we can connect with that, I think that the potential for collective healing is and planetary healing is tremendous. And yeah, I think it's the idea there is that there is this kind of circulating flow of energy in the world, of vital energy, the vital life force. And in the Mohawk language, we refer to that as Gusset Stensera, which is variously translated, but the translation that I appreciate is the continuance of life. And so when we tap into these natural cycles and these effective flows, if you will, of the places and persons, human and otherwise, around us, then I think that does something to elevate us. And I want that for myself, and I want that for everybody around me, and I want that for the medicines. But before I finish that response, I wouldn't mind sharing a quick story. My mentor and elder Dan Longboat told me that he was up in the Northwest Territories with Winona LaDuke a number of years ago and teaching people how to garden up there because, of course, with Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, gardening is very much part of the culture. But when you go further north, it's not so much because it's so cold. It's not so easy to garden. But so it didn't really evolve there so much, from my understanding. And so you're supposed to sing songs to plants to seeds when you plant them, and then the seeds when they germinate. And there are these songs that honor the plants and they recognize them and appreciate. They're songs of appreciation, really. And so the people really wanted Dan and Winona to teach them those songs. And Dan's response, I found, was it was really brilliant and really it came from the heart, and it was also really insightful. And so what he said is, he said, well, I can't teach you those songs because those come from the Great Lakes. So you have to learn the spirit language of this land, and then the songs, to sing to the garden plants that you're growing here. And I just thought that really opened things up for me when Dan said that. I just, wow, that's so powerful. And like, wow, are there ways for all of us to really learn that spirit language where we live, the spirit language of the land? And really there are. We can do that. It's part of our birthright. You don't have to be an indigenous person or have indigenous heritage like me. You just have to be a person on this planet and pay attention and tap in.
That's such an incredible reminder just to pay attention and tap in. And you've implied this a little bit, but I want to just bring this forward that it's important to recognize colonialism and its impact on humans and plants. And I know your work is with a decolonial approach. And can you talk more about a decolonial approach and plant ethics and why that's really important, why it matters?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. That's so important, and I'm really glad that you had formulated that question because for me it's really at the heart. It's at the heart of our I'm not a maybe I shouldn't diagnose our problem here, but I'm not a diagnostician, but I think that colonial mentality is at the heart of our rupture with the world around us and the kind of existential problems that we're facing. So I also see colonialism, in effect, not to go too far down a rabbit hole with this, but if you look at the word, it comes from colonia, I think, which is Latin, and that really it means farming. And so I think plants and agriculture are really tied up in this colonial agenda, colonial project since the beginning. Um, and I think in a way, colonization and colonialism, for me anyway, I see it as kind of a stand-in or it represents something much bigger. And that's what I see as some kind of underlying problems with Western thought, and I think many of those problems began with the European Renaissance and Newtonian and Cartesian thought that separates humans, and specifically certain humans, from the rest of creation. And I think that um, artificial and enforced binary is something that I think we could all work to dissolve and move past in different ways. And I think one of those ways, if I can just say that really quickly, is by appreciating and embodying different forms that are in the natural world. And so that, why is it that we tend to default to the binary, and particularly hierarchical binaries? And I mean, I think there's a good reason, and it's because we as humans are bilaterally symmetrical. So there's a binary here, right, with two eyes and two hands. So it's not that I think we have to do away with binaries per se, but I think there's a world of form and pattern that I think if we were to appreciate and embody it in an emplaced manner, I think that would, it's like diversity of thought. We talk a lot about biodiversity, but I think we can appreciate the diversity of modes of thinking.
And I wonder if you could say more about how the binary and colonialism, and especially the decolonial approach
Yeah.
could help with relationships with plants now.
Right. Oh yeah. Sorry. I probably should have gone there. I think I just got a bit carried away in my response. My apologies.
Oh no,
Um,
please.
that I would say, I mean, maybe I mentioned this earlier. I can't really remember. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast, let alone what I said 5 minutes ago. But um, it strikes me that plants are really ideal in a way for helping us to challenge some of these colonial notions because plants are unruly and they don't necessarily listen or behave when we try to discipline them in colonial ways. So I think there's this kind of inherent trickster, and I would say fungi are even more so. Um, and I think just attending to that, attending to Trickster in that way, I think could really help us to disrupt some of these patterns of thought, patterns of being as well. And really, when you look at plants, I mean, they're everywhere around us, and we use plants, we engage with plants daily. I'm having my ginger and turmeric tea right now. I had coffee this morning. I'm wearing a cotton shirt. I'm sitting at a laminate desk, but there is some wood in there, I think. And I just think they're because they're so ubiquitous in our lives. I think plants, in a sense, are kind of ideal partners with which to decolonize.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
Definitely. It makes a lot of sense to me, and um, and thank you for explaining it. I I wonder if you think plants want or expect humans to act in any certain way towards them.
oh my gosh, I love this question. This is an amazing question. Thank you. I don't know if I have a good answer, but it's a very good question. I would say yes, and I think again, there's a few ways to look at that. If we look at, for example, indigenous traditional knowledge, there's this notion of the original instructions and or natural law, and these were sort of guidelines that were given to humanity by the creator or by creation, depending on how you want to frame that, to help us um, lead our best lives and to fulfill our obligations to creation, to the rest of the world. And at the very minimum, those original instructions exhort us to, at the very least, um, um, avoid interfering with other organisms' abilities to fulfill their own obligations to creation. And so I think I think we all have our instructions, including the plants. And I think that's one way to look at what they expect from us and what we can expect from them. Um, I think another thing to look at too is, and again, I guess this would be from more of a Western perspective, is that plants and humans have evolved together. I won't say co-evolved because there's a very specific scientific um, definition of coevolution, and it's kind of difficult to prove. But we have evolved together for a very long time, and I just think there's with that I guess that evolutionary process or coevolutionary process, um, not exactly in the scientific sense. I think that through that there are certain habits and forms that have evolved that I think suggest that that plants expect things from us. And for example, I'm going to do it again. I'll apologize now, but here it comes. Corn. Um, you know, corn cannot reproduce without human help, and so that's one thing that corn expects from us is that harvesting and seed saving and then planting.
Mhm.
So I think that would be one example, and that if you look at that from and again an evolutionary perspective, that kind of relationship evolved over many generations.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think what you're talking about now is somewhat of a way out of or around the human exceptionalism that's so entrenched in dominant culture. And I'm curious if you want to say anything more about human exceptionalism and the ways that that's affecting plants and humans and animals. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it definitely does. And I just think, we're all made of the same stuff. And so I, I don't know, for me, I just think why is it that when we look at a plant or an animal or, even other people in some cases, if you're racist, why is it that it's so easy to view others as other? Why is that so easy when we're all made of the same stuff? For me, I like to just my baseline or my default is just to assume that because these plants are made up of the same building blocks that I am and they're subject to the same influences, that they probably have many of the same characteristics, even if they're expressed in a very different way. And so I think that human exceptionalism piece, it's so important to really, I mean, you know, I guess academically it's important to kind of work against that and work towards discrediting it. But I think in our lives, I think we have to constantly, I have to constantly check myself and say, well, why am I thinking this way? Why is it okay for me to take this life and not, not this other one? And I think for me that also really gets to something that I see as really core to the sense of the sacred. And since we're, in part talking about sacred plants, not just psychedelics, but corn, as you know, is also sacred. Um, and I think, you know, leading up to this webinar, I had to ask myself, I was thinking about some of these questions, and I was thinking like, boy, what is it that makes something sacred? And I was pondering that, and I came up with a few things, and one of them is that I think that there's we have to kill, something has to die in order for us to live. Death is very much a part of life. And I think if you follow Francis Weller, for instance, I think he talks about how many of the problems that we face in the Western world or in the globalized Western world, which is the whole world, are caused by unmetabolized grief. And I just think that boy, decentering the human and finding ways, ritual, for example, to express gratitude for the lives that are taken so that we can survive is, for me, that's at the heart of that relationship is at the heart of what makes something sacred. And I think, we're killing plants every day. So how is it that we recognize that and celebrate the gift of their lives so that we can have a gift of our lives?
And
Sorry,
that
that's
brings
a bit too many words. I'm sorry, I'm talking too
No,
much.
no. Thank you so much for sharing. And that brings us back around to the idea of plants as kin that you were talking about at the beginning. And I want to go deeper into this idea of relationship and good or right relationship with plants. So you've already talked a bit about these relationships, but what are right relationships with plants? And are there practical ways that human people, indigenous and non-indigenous, could get started towards a right relationship?
I love this question. It's so important. It's so important. And I guess all I could do really is share some of my own experiences just briefly, because I guess we're maybe running out of time here. But briefly, I guess one thing for me is I grow cannabis every year because I can. It's legal and now in Canada, and so I'm developing a relationship with that plant over the past few years, and you know there's something that kind of bugs me about the way cannabis is grown in the mainstream, and it's people grow these plants that have been subjected to things like silver nitrate and other mutagens so that you only get females, like feminized seed, and they're grown indoors under these really stressful conditions. And I know that, in some cases people do that so that the phytochemical constituents are higher. But I just see for the relationship that I have with these plants, I want to treat them well. They do so much for me. Like what kind of, they help me sleep at night. What can I do for them? And so one of the things that I do is I always grow regular seed. So seed that can be, can germinate and produce a male or a female. I grow them outside, and I usually allow one or two males out of 4 or 5 plants to grow and produce pollen every year. So that's one thing that I do because it seems that that's what they want. And in terms of, for example, fungi, I spend a lot of time in the woods looking for mushrooms, and if I come across a patch of wood lovers, for example, and it looks like they've grown through most of their substrate, maybe I'll look for some freshly fallen wood to place on top of the patch. Or if it looks like these wood lovers are thirsty, maybe maybe I would cover them with some leaves so that they can retain some moisture. I might even give them some of the water that I brought for my walk. So I think there are different ways. I also think it's really important to watch for patterns. And really that's, for me, that's at the heart of indigenous ways of being in the land, is to look at patterns in the land. And so, for example, um, I'll just say this quickly because I know we're running out of time here, but um, there's a species of psychedelic mushroom that grows here in Nova Scotia, and I actually haven't published on this yet, but it hasn't really been reported in the scientific literature. It's Psilocybe aztecorum, and this basically there's this chain right from the mountains of Mexico all the way up to Nova Scotia on the east coast, and then to maybe Colorado in the west. I can't remember. It's very interesting, and so some of those fungi grow near me, and I've really attended to their habits and what's happening when they're fruiting. And so I find that they tend to fruit, shortly after the Jerusalem artichoke starts to flower, and when the migratory robins from Newfoundland arrive back, and when the red-winged blackbirds arrive, or no, sorry, when they start staging to go south. So there are a few things like that, and also just attending to how they respond to the wind and desiccation. You learn what their preferences are, and I think coming to know the preferences and the habits of these relatives is that's like a coming to love them. Coming to know them is coming to love them.
Mm. I appreciate that sense of being with them and the relationship, really developing the relationship over time. Like any relationship needs that time,
Yeah,
attention to develop on both sides.
it's a commitment. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll go to audience. We'll go to some questions from those who are in the audience. But I wanted to focus on this because education has been such a strong aspect of your work as well,
Yeah.
and education is such an important piece through lifetime of education. And I'm curious if you have any advice for those in the audience who might be interested in getting more into plants or being educators with focus on plants. Do you have any practical suggestions for people who want to get more involved?
Sure. I guess a couple things. One thing I would say is that, when you look at formal education per Bourdieu, for example, it's really in the service of transmitting what could be considered culturally approved or culturally sanctioned normative knowledge and values. And I don't know, I guess I just think like, well, is that really what we want to be doing? And I'm a big fan of Tim Ingold. He's a British anthropologist. I love his work. And he talks a little bit about this, and he says, well, for him, education and research isn't about knowledge production or even the transmission of these like kind of culturally sanctioned um, uh, knowledge and perspectives. It's more about contributing to our store of collective wisdom. And I just think, for me, I see that as really important. And I keep having to remind myself because in these formal educational systems, it's very hard to do things differently. And so I think if we consider that that's the purpose of education, like what then does that mean? What then does that mean for us and for the plants and the animals and everything else? Like if it's about contributing to this vast store of collective wisdom, what if we consider that vast store of collective wisdom beyond the human? And I guess to finish that response, I would say that um, education really I mentioned the kind of challenges of educating in a more formal environment. I think if people are really interested in pushing the boundaries and trying to do something a little bit more radical with education, I would say start with the people around you, your family and your friends and the people in your community, and, other informal, like walks and talks, just informal ways of sharing what you know and what you think with people, because I think there's a lot more room in those kind of contexts. So,
Thank you, Keith.
thank you.
So we have many questions from the audience, and we'll get through as many as we possibly can. Lots of gratitude and
Oh,
appreciation for you in the chat. Um,
oh,
and
thank you.
we have someone who particularly loves the idea of plants as tricksters, and they're wondering if there are some indigenous ways of reacting to plants' unpredictability, especially when it comes to things like crop failures or seasonal irregularity.
So just to make sure I understand the question was how actually, could you read that again? I'm sorry.
Of course. What are some indigenous ways of reacting to plants' unpredictability?
Right.
Things like crop
Okay.
failure, seasonal irregularity, the trickster
Sure.
nature of plants.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess all I can say about that is there's a Nehiyao or Cree woman, Margaret Kovach, who's a scholar and thinker, and she, in her language, trickster is referred to as Wasagachak or whiskey jack, and that's also the name of a bird that I think is probably related to blue jays, which are also tricksters. Um, and what she's come up with this idea, it's the trickster hypothesis or something like that. I love it. And it's the idea that when it comes to Trickster, really, Trickster shows up to teach us something. And I think the key there is just to be attentive to what Trickster is trying to share with us. And I guess further to that, I kind of feel like in a way, we humans are caught in one centuries-long trickster tale, and we have yet to figure out what we're trying to learn, what we need to learn from this, and yeah, maybe I'll leave it at that. I don't know if that fully answers it, but that's I guess that's what I have.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This next question is from Lucy, and with a lot of appreciation. Would you say that gift logic and reciprocity are different from each other?
Hmm. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think Lewis Hyde, the American scholar and essayist, poet, scholar, and essayist, brilliant, brilliant writer. He and Genevieve Vaughn are two of the people who I draw on quite heavily in my thinking around gift logic. And I think he talks about the difference between circular reciprocity and maybe it's direct reciprocity. I can't remember. But the idea is for him is that there is a fundamental difference between those two. And direct reciprocity is more like bartering, whereas circular reciprocity is that idea of giving without the expectation of receiving from the person or creature or place that you give to. So I think there is a distinction there, a fine distinction, but it's hard to know like how people are using the word reciprocity. I think people probably use it in a much less nuanced way. So it probably the context matters there, I would say.
Ah, that makes that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that.
Oh.
I think we have another question around reciprocity. So I'll go to this question. This is from Shelley, who's part of a collective working with mycoremediation in the UK. And they do their very, very best to be full of gratitude, but also learn from plants, learn from the plants and fungi as much as they can, and constantly trying to decentralize. Um, so though they're using fungi to remediate practices, which need to stop, trying to clean up messes that humans have made, do you have any suggestions about how to make this reciprocal?
Hmm. Yeah, I do. I would say depends on the fungi that you're working with. But I don't know if the person who asked the question wants to type their names of the fungi in the box or in the chat box or not. But if you do, please feel free. I think, each fungus, each organism has, and each individual has its own preferences. And I think moving away from species thinking towards thinking about individuals, communities, and families is a little bit, and I don't mean families in the taxonomic sense, but I think that's a really good way to go. And again, I think just attending to these fungi, like if do you ever encounter these fungi in the wild, and how is it that they're living there when they're wild and free? Like how do they express themselves? What is it that they're that they're how are they what do they seem to like? What do they what does it take to allow them to flourish in their natural environment? And if for example it's a fungus like Stropharia rugoso annulata, the wine cap Stropharia, maybe that doesn't grow where you live, so it might be or not in the wild. So it might be you might have to look to your composting or your bioremediation setup, and what have you learned about that fungus's habits and preferences. And I think when you have that sense, then you'll know what they need and what they prefer, and then you can give that to them, I would say. Of course, there's also, I mean, not to go too far off topic with this, but there are a number of people who are looking into interspecies, I mean, different types of interspecies communication, intuitive interspecies communication. And um, certainly I've met elders and knowledge keepers who speak with plants and fungi quite literally, and not just not just, this isn't just a kind of a metaphoric thing, it's quite literal. And it's not that the plant opens their mouth and words come out, it's more something that people receive. But I do think that that's a skill. I think that we, if we could all cultivate that somehow, I don't know if that's possible or how that's possible, but I think there's something really provocative about that idea.
Thank you. And I don't see any specific species in the chat yet, but we'll see if that person
Sure,
then. Uh,
sure.
and Manon says, amazingly fascinating. Thank
Oh,
you. It's
oh, thank
interesting to
you.
think about extending the philosophy of kinship of plants towards microbes, as an example.
Yeah,
Since microbes are such an integral part of us, and it's hard to make that human microbe distinction. So do you see any
yeah.
obstacles to extending the idea of kinship towards microbes?
I mean, I suppose we can't see them. So that's, I mean, by their very definition, right? Although, I mean, again, there are certain actually, I should backtrack. We can see them. Um, think about yeasts. When you're growing yeast, even when you proof bread yeast, you get this yeast colony on top of your warm water. I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not, Laura. I don't think I have yet, but I managed to track down some Rhizopus oligosporus spores, and it's a bit of a mouthful. And so I've been trying to make tempeh at home, and it's working. And how exciting that is. And so that's another, it's a fungus, but fungi are also considered microbes. Um, yeah, so I don't know about the barriers, but in terms of engaging with microbes, I would say ferment, ferment, ferment. That would be my injunction, or my my suggestion. Just get in there and start learning about them. And here's a suggestion, actually, if you really want to do that, here's something I find really exciting. I used to do this. I haven't done it in a while. But you can bait wild yeasts from the air in your house if you want, and that's a way to. I mean, imagine like hyper localized terroir. So basically, all you do is you just leave some like dough and water out on your counter. You might want to put some cheesecloth on, and those yeasts will find their way to the dough, and you'll have your own natural sourdough. You can do the same thing with fruit skins, and I've done that as well. So with grapes and plums, and sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's disgusting. So but it's an adventure every time. So that would be my suggestion. Just get to know them by working with them and depending on them, and then engaging with them in that way.
Hmm. Going back to the relationship again.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
relationship.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a
Yeah.
tasty relationship, depending.
Right. Right. So Pete says, brilliant insights, Keith. Uh, what
Thanks, Pete.
arises for you about the messages plants can bring to us as individuals or as communities? Um, uh, Thinking about either a favorite flower or herb, or a despised weed.
Well, yeah, and I see you, Pete, up there in the box and the hi, Pete. It's good to see you again. And thanks for the great question. Weeds, so-called weeds are really interesting to me because I just find, there's this war on plants, really. And it's like not just a war on trees, there's a war on plants in general. And I don't know, I love them all. I mean, for the most part, I think about here in the place where I live, just even when I look out the window, there's these uh multiflora roses that came from Japan, and there's a tiny little wasp that lives in the flowers of these roses, and they're so small and they're really beautiful, and the roses smell amazing when they're flowering, and so I guess I was talking to a Mi'kmaq woman about this a while ago, and she said something like that I thought was really lovely, and it was her name's Shalan Chowdhury, and she said something along the lines of they're here just like us, and they deserve to be respected just like us, and I think in a way I see those so-called invasives as maybe they're like younger brothers or younger sisters. They're new arrivals. They haven't quite learned the spirit language of this place. They haven't quite figured out how to be good relations yet. But that's a work in progress. And in a way, I just find this preoccupation with invasives. It's fascinating to me as a post-colonial scholar because I, I just feel like there's some kind of sublimated guilt there or something. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but and I won't diagnose, but I guess I just did. But anyway, maybe I'll stop talking. But
I'm glad you brought this up because there was a question earlier about invasives and the
oh,
relationship between in-place relationships and invasive species. So I'm curious if there's anything more you wanted to say about invasives.
well, yeah. I mean, I think I've yeah, I actually had a chat with Peter, the fellow that asked that question maybe a month or two ago, and I find he's a very thoughtful person. So anything Peter has written or said about invasives is worth reading. Um, uh, for me, I just think they're here just like us. I think we need to respect them the way we respect everything else. They deserve that respect and that recognition. And I think rather than killing them all. Why don't we find ways that we can benefit from their presence? And I don't know if there's a way that we can help them to be better relations. That's a question that I have no answer for yet, but it's something I think we could all think about. What is it that it would take for an invasive species to be a better relation? And is there anything that we can do to help set the table for that?
Mm. So this is another question from Lucy. What are your thoughts on genetic modification of plants? Is this a way to try to control the unruliness?
Oh my goodness. I don't know which Lucy that is, but I have a colleague, Lucy Solid, who's totally brilliant. And she's written this amazing paper called The Synthetic Sacred, and it's published by Nero Editions. I don't know if that's you, Lucy, but um, I, I think with genetic modification, um, you know, my immediate reaction, my visceral reaction to that is that there's a big problem there. And I think there is, but I don't think that it has to be bad. I don't think it has to be wrong. And that's because, um, if we're looking at natural effective flows in the world around us, um, there are these transposable elements in our genome and in every genome, transposons, and they have this ability to move. And that's why, for example, viruses are good vectors of disease because they can pick up little fragments of DNA from places and other viruses, and they can transmit them to us. I think I got that right. Anyway, but those transposons are mobile. And so there is already this inclination to move around in the genetic code and in our genome. And so I think there's something there, but I don't quite know how that translates into right relations in biotechnology. I have to think about that more. And I think maybe we all could.
It's an interesting topic and good question to
Oh,
keep thinking
I
about.
agree. Yeah, so relevant and so timely. And I guess I just, for me, I just actually, if I could just add one thing to that, I keep bringing up Dan's name, but I mean this Dan Longboat, but he really inspires, his thinking has inspired me in so many ways. Um, uh, I remember I was talking with Dan and another friend, Ariel Clark, who's a Anishinaabe Odawa woman and a lawyer. And and both of us have ancestry from the Great Lakes region, and neither of us live there. And so I sort of said, "Oh, Dan, it would be, really great to talk to you because you have, you're living there and you have this connection to this place, and we don't right now." And he basically told me, he said, even if you have one drop of blood from this place, you have a connection, and you can, it's that blood memory, the idea of blood memory, and I think, that's for me, that's very powerful, and I think that's the same for these genetically modified organisms. So for instance, if you look at Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast that has been genetically modified to produce psilocybin, I mean, a question that I ask, and I think I already know the answer to is, can that, can that yeast that's been genetically modified with the gene cluster to produce psilocybin, can it feel the winds in the Sierra Mazateca? Can it remember those winds? Can it remember the, the feel of those subtropical or tropical insects on its cap? Can it feel on their cap? Can this yeast remember the veladas that that took place with their relatives in Huautla? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, that's following indigenous logic, the answer would be yes. And what that does for me is that really, if we consider that kind of like that reverberation through time, I mean, that I just think that puts a whole other that adds a whole other that adds nuance and depth to the idea of reparations, for instance. Like, wow, it blows that wide open, and I think it could engender a whole other conversation around that topic, just for example. So
Ah, thank you. Thank you. So we have another one from Issy, and they say they speak with plants and trees, and as I read this, the plants and trees speak to them sometimes in words and sometimes in symbols.
yeah.
That they say that they miss the connection they used to have with us humans, I think is what
um,
that is meaning. And part of what they
yeah.
desire is to be truly seen. Just that makes a difference. I wonder if there's something biological, chemical in the transfer of attention. So
Hmm.
they're wondering what Keith might think.
uh I think yes. There, next question. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. Yeah, I think that's so interesting. That is such an interesting question. I tend not to look at things necessarily from, pheromones, think about things in terms of pheromones and molecules like that so much more as metaphor. But what that person has described is very similar to things that I've heard from elders and knowledge keepers who also talk with plants, and that has influenced me to really attend to their their presence and their needs and um their habits and what they need to flourish. And I think actually, um there's a prophecy that a Haudenosaunee prophecy, and I think it really speaks to that question or that point that was just brought up. And it's basically the idea that I might have even written about this somewhere, I can't remember, but the idea that as humans move away from the wild spaces and into the profligate farm acreages and suburbs, we forget to pay attention to the animals and the plants and the rivers and the mountains. We stop paying attention to them. And and eventually they'll stop paying attention to us. That's normal, right? Like that's how relationships work. And when they stop paying attention to us, life as we know it will be impossible. And I just feel like, wow, when I first heard that, that really hit me. And I just think, when things hit you and it's just like you hear something and you know it in your body, there's this felt sense that this is true, that this is true. And I had that feeling when I first heard that prophecy. And so I think what Issy Clark is doing, I just saw their name come up on the chat. What Issy Clark is doing and the work that they're doing is of critical importance. And I just think we all need to be doing this work. We all need to be paying attention. Whether we necessarily get anything back or not, I mean, that's later. That's the next step. That may take a while, but just putting ourselves in their presence and attending to them is, I think there's an existential need to do this.
Mm-hmm. And like you were saying before, the how you know that maybe the mushroom needs a little bit of leaves to have more water is because you're paying such close attention over time to them.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think so. Yeah. It's important. And
absolutely.
I mean, it's like a way of life, really. Like that's what I see with all of this, for me anyway. It's like all the responses that I've shared, this isn't just an academic thing. It's not just my work. It's like, it's life, this is life. And
Yeah,
and I would encourage like all of us, everyone, this is what I want for everyone. I want everybody to in your own ways, and yeah. I want
yeah,
that for the plants and mushrooms too. They deserve it as well, and they deserve our attention.
yeah. They do. They do. And it sounds like
Yeah.
some people in the audience are already on that path as
I'm
well.
sure. I'm sure. It
Yeah.
sure sounds like it. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a question here from and I believe I'm saying this Susa. Um, and I'm going to read this and let you respond to it. Can plants get into our consciousness?
Oh, um, yeah. There's nothing more unsettling than that, actually. And not for me. And so, in that sense, I mean, oh, thank you, Stephen. In that sense, I would say, I would say, yeah, maybe I can back up for a minute. I I think many people who appreciate psychedelic plant medicines have had experiences in which, you know, uh, the mushroom speaks with them. For instance, the mushroom, maybe it's Mama Ayahuasca, I don't know, but these medicines speak to us in our heads, you know, and there's nothing more at odds with the Western worldview than I mean, that's the definition of psychosis in a way, right? Or one of many definitions. Um, and but it happens. It happens. It's happened to me. It's happened to many people I know. And I just think, wow, it's like there's something profoundly tricky, trickster, about that. And boy, I would even take that a step further. And I would say, from my experience, you know how if you see somebody who's been smoking for a long time, you kind of have a sense of that, right? Like you can see it in their face, like their skin is pulled back a little bit, and there are wrinkles in certain areas, and then there's, the hoarse voice. Same with alcohol. Like if someone has, and I don't mean to compare sacred plant medicines to, I mean, same with coffee, and I think the same goes for psychedelics. You meet people and it's like you just have this sense that, that their consciousness has been, it's like a shared consciousness. And I don't know, maybe that's veering into some challenging territory, but I find it very interesting and strange.
Uh, and I might also add too that to me it seems essential. Going back to the
Yeah.
definition of consciousness, concierge
Yeah.
knowing with, so knowing with the plants and those that
I
are contributing. Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree. And I really draw a lot from Judith Butler's work. I really love her theorizing. I'm a big fan. Or sorry, their theorizing. And so with Judith Butler, recognition is a through line through all of their work. And I just think if for me, I've found it very productive to apply their thinking on recognition and kinship to the plant world. And I think I pulled out a quote of hers or sorry, theirs to read, but I don't know. I might not be able to find it in time. Um, okay, yeah. Okay, here it is. This is from Undoing Gender, which was a brilliant book written in 2004. And they express that relationality, and this is a quotation, simply avows that we who are relational do not stand apart from those relations and cannot think of ourselves outside of the decentering effects that relationality entails. So I totally agree with you, Laura. I think what you're saying is absolutely correct and so profound.
Oh, well, I think what you're saying is correct and so
Oh,
profound. And on that note, we need to say thank you to you and thank you for this conversation and all of your insights and doing this
oh,
with us. Thank you.
oh, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be. I wish we were all together in person, but it's such a pleasure to be here in this space with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, both to Keith and Laura for just a wonderful conversation and everyone for your great questions. This program has been one of a number of online conversations. So we hope that you'll join us for some future conversations from the Plant Initiative. The next one being on May 14th with renowned artist Uriel Orlov, Conversing with Leaves, Plants, Politics, and More Than Human Witnessing. So thanks again for attending today. And if you would like to support the Plant Initiative with a donation through our website, we always appreciate it to help support these programs.